really important for the person struggling with OCD to be able to take an assessment where they see themselves in the assessment and what their experience is, because you can take whatever the assessment is, and if you're not seeing the experiences that you're having written down, you might think that, oh, well, I don't have OCD. Or
I learned so much how OCD really can present and be about anything. And then repeatedly people being misdiagnosed with other things, not realizing that some of their intrusive thoughts were, like, again, classic OCD.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer Podcast. Today with me, I have Dr. Kimberly Glazier Leonte and Dr. Jacquelin Gouniai, who are the co-founders of the OCD Academy. It's an organization dedicated to providing educational resources to help individuals with OCD on their path to recovery, individuals who have a loved one with OCD, and professionals who are seeking specialized training in OCD, ERP, and acceptance-based approaches. Kimberly and Jacquelin are passionate about increasing awareness of the broad range of ways OCD presents, education regarding specialized and nuanced OCD therapeutic approaches, and working to reduce OCD and mental health stigma. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I will say, actually, one kind of interesting, funny caveat is I had something called very similar to you girls, and we all reached out. I'm like, oh my God, wait a minute, is there an issue here? And you were both very generous to tell me, no, we've actually coexisted for a little while. Just, I don't think you knew it, but we knew it. So, the OCD, one of the things that I know you both are working on is the OCD Awareness Scale. So I think for anybody listening today, of course, I'm sure people want to know, well, what is that exactly? How did you come about this? Let's talk about it. So Kim, would you mind diving in?
Sure, of course. So yes, so as you were kind of mentioning, Jackie and I were both super passionate about increasing OCD awareness, the wide range of ways that OCD shows up. And we can kind of speak to that, how we met over that similar theme based on research studies. And so for myself, prior to what kind of got me in that research path of increasing awareness for OCD, was when I worked at McLean in their OCD residential program. And one of the things I learned there pretty quickly was how oftentimes, unfortunately, people aren't aware of OCD, professionals aren't as aware as OCD because it presents so widely, and the way in which it can kind of get presented in the media, even in many forms, can be in a more limited scope. And so the other very common ways that OCD shows up can sometimes be not aware that it is OCD. And so when speaking with the clients at McLean, that was just a pattern that I noticed and led to a passion of mine, kind of looking more into that from a research perspective. And so the research studies that I worked on looked at mental health professionals and their ability to identify a wide range of common OCD presentations, and then medical professionals, since primary care is such a common place for people to talk about mental health from like a more of a medication prescription place. And also from grad students. And then Jackie and I met. She can speak to the studies that Jackie's done on the same theme. Why don't you take the lead on that, Jackie, and then I can kind of bring it back to the awareness scale as well after.
Yeah, so me and Kim met because I was also doing a very similar research for my PsyD dissertation. And so I wanted to look at whether medical professionals on Guam and actually religious leaders like clergy, pastors, priests are able to identify varying presentations of OCD. And that was really informed by kind of my background with my own OCD, which I can talk about later if that's appropriate. But on Guam, we don't have enough mental health professionals. I think I'm the only OCD specialist as far as I know on Guam. And so a lot of people will go to their medical provider first or a religious leader to get, treatment, or not treatment, but help for mental health struggles. So I just thought that would be appropriate for Guam. And so when I looked into the research that was out there, at the time, it was really only Kim's research. And so it was really what I wanted to be studying. So I reached out to her, and she was super, super generous and was like, yeah, I'll mentor you, I'll help you out. And so that's really how we connected, was through that research study.
Yeah. And so our passion for like increasing awareness is incredibly similar. And so it's just been a really nice kind of partnership for our OCD passion and both kind of focusing on OCD and the awareness piece, but also helpful therapeutic approaches for helping people with OCD. And so the awareness scale, so that was kind of defined from the early for me, from the McLean experiences of learning so much about OCD there and be about anything. And then repeatedly people being misdiagnosed with other things, not realizing that some of their intrusive thoughts were like, again, classic OCD, but and how unhelpful that was for them and how it was so valuable learning that this is just OCD. So that then with the studies, and then, there's a lot of materials out there on OCD and different measures that can be really, really helpful from a clinical perspective, from a training perspective, or research perspective. But one of the things when looking at these different measures, I feel like because OCD can really latch on to anything, it's at one level impossible to make something like completely comprehensive, but at another level, I think that there was room for trying to make some type of tool for people that really included more of the themes and in more examples within the themes. So that's what we were trying to do with the OCD awareness scale, is kind of breaking down the obsessions and rituals and giving examples. We put a lot of care into it. And so we have, with the different examples, wanted to try to make it as representative as we could with the examples within the themes. So say it's, making sure we're having the examples that are harm related, existential related, perfectionistic related, all of them, so that it's not real event OCD related, so that people can really kind of connect with it. And so that's another piece that we really cared about when we were working on the measure, to make it like as representative as we can, with, of course, having the limitations that you can't kind of get every single type of OCD in one measure. So we kind of have the measure has initial, like an intro that has a lot of education, and then it goes and breaks it down into the obsessions and rituals with the different examples. And we go over, I believe it's 15 obsessional themes and then 19 for the ritual categories with examples across all of them.
I love that. I think that's great. Sorry to jump in. I just want to, I just think in general, when we think of folks who are listening, like people maybe have heard about the Y-box, the Brown obsessive compulsive scale, right? But I do appreciate, because I think over time as well, as more information is out, more people are aware and start to learn, like, wait a second, I don't quite fit into these top 5, 6, 7 categories. Like, oh, that was my case. I didn't think I had OCD because I didn't fit those things that I saw. So I'm like, well, I don't have it. Only to learn, oh my gosh, there's these other ways it shows up. So just to say, right, that folks listening, the Y-box currently, of course, is a clinical measure, but I really deeply appreciate hearing that there's work put in this way where we can expand it further and really continue to have people understand that there's other ways this manifests than the top major ways that we hear. Like contamination is, of course, a very common one, or like lining things up, right?
Yes. Agreed. And I know too that sometimes people could, because there's those ones that people kind of view as a classic, then people who have the other types can feel like, oh, mine OCD isn't common, or is this really OCD? And it's like, all of these are common. And it's just that, again, how it's been portrayed over time. And I think, again, there's so much that is improving on this front, but I think it's still room for a lot more improvement. And what you were saying, I think Jackie was connecting that too, about her experiences as well.
And I think it's really important for the person struggling with OCD to be able to, take an assessment where they see themselves in the assessment and what their experience is, because you can take whatever the assessment is, and if you're not seeing the experiences that you're having written down, you might think that, oh, well, I don't have OCD, or maybe this person is not able to treat what I have, or that somehow you're other in some way, which is not true, right? OCD can manifest in a million different ways. And of course, we don't have every single portrayal of OCD out on the scale, because that would not be possible, but we really try to make it comprehensive so that when the user takes it, they can connect with it. And also, I think it's good for the clinician as well, because especially if somebody is not specialized in OCD and they're giving a standard whatever the scale would be, and it doesn't include a lot of information on there, the person might not know additional questions to ask to kind of get all of the symptoms from their client out in the open so that they can start working on it. So that's why we try to make it as comprehensive as possible and put a ton of examples in there.
And try
That's
to
really,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
In a format that's not too long. So it's tried to make it as short as we could with still being comprehensive.
Well, that's the challenge, right? Because like we're talking here, the reality is that, like OCD, the brain piece, right? And kind of the process of how OCD works is really pretty similar, but the exact topic that you specifically are going to be more vulnerable around, that's so individualized. Right. And so, yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, I love this, but I think it's so interesting because there are so many nuanced ways this can show up, a lot more that we're more familiar with, like false memory or real event or relationship OCD or just right feeling off OCD, right? That maybe we didn't before know as much, but there's still other ways, emotional contamination or where things can morph. And so disgust, right? So there's just so many variations, iterations that, yeah, I mean, it's a big project to take on to try to say, okay, how can we get all of it in there? And, I think I love hearing that what you're saying is like, look, we're really working to get as many on the list as possible with ample examples so that you can hopefully see yourself in there and understanding it's not going to be exactly every single nuance possible. But I think part of also when I hear this, right, so if the person who thinks they might have OCD or knows they have OCD or whatnot, yeah, they can look at it and use it. But I wonder too, what about if there's someone who loves, how would the scale be helpful for them? What could this do?
Do you want me to take that one, Kim? Sure. So I think that in terms of loved ones, I think a lot of people, again, just like with people who struggle with OCD or the general public, a lot of loved ones don't have like the knowledge base to know about all the nuances, right, of OCD and the ways it can present. So seeing a scale like that's more comprehensive, I think it makes it real for them, like, oh, okay, like this really is a part of OCD, right? It's on the scale. And to have that awareness of all the ways in which it can present and be able to see like, oh, when my partner or my child is talking about this or doing these things, this is part of the OCD. And to be able to see that on a scale is, I think, important. So the comprehensiveness of it, but also like going back to what we were talking about earlier of like the lengthiness. I think what's good about the scale is that we've categorized everything into different themes. And so it's like if something doesn't resonate with you, you can kind of like go through that section and be like, oh, this is not what I'm going through. And like really focus on the ones where it's like, these themes resonate with me. And so even for like loved ones looking at the scale, they can be like, okay, these are the different themes that my partner or my child is struggling with.
Got it. And do you have, just for me, because as I'm listening, I'm thinking, okay, let's say if I'm a parent, do you have a scale? Is this a scale that's good for any age, or is there an age component to this or not really?
So it's looking at we envision this that can be useful for really everyone. And you're looking at kind of like the wide box versus a side box, right? And they're super similar for the types of examples and how they present. So our goal with kids who would be on the younger side, because some of like the OCD content, right, can be content that sometimes people can feel more hesitant to talk about. So if you're giving this to a younger kid, kind of like sharing with the parent beforehand and having a look before, because we want to kind of balance that need, that helpfulness of being able to like talk openly about OCD, but also that concern with some parents if their kid isn't struggling with that theme, or they might not know if their kid is or not. And so we don't have a separate kid version, but it's kind of like comprehensive to all of OCD. So it's more of from a user kind of their way of kind of speaking with the parents when going over kind of OCD, right? And the types of examples and how it would be kind of discussed with the kid. So we kind of envision it being the same as if we were working with a kid. This is just like an extra tool to help be really comprehensive in the assessment of what's happening for the kid.
Got it. And just to clarify, when you say user, because I'm sure people listening, like, what do you mean when you say that? Are you saying about like if I'm the one taking the scale or using it, or if I'm the parent using it with my kiddo, or.
So I think for that example, I was just saying, I was talking more from like a therapist using it to help with kind of learning about a kid's OCD, but it doesn't need to be a therapist, right? So we kind of view this as helpful for kind of anyone that's wanting to either learn about OCD or understand their OCD or a loved one's OCD more. So if the therapist is not involved, then it would be kind of like the parent would be looking at it and hopefully learning and hopefully feeling comfortable with being able to kind of go through and kind of share, you know, these are common worries that people can have, right? And so kind of destigmatizing and really making it an open conversation of, do you have any of these, or do any of these kind of connect with you, or do you know, I notice that you do this, is this because of that? So we just want to have like open conversations to try to get the kid feel, or the person feels most comfortable as they can with talking about some of these themes that are super common, but can have, unfortunately, more kind of stigma associated with at times.
So yeah, thank you for answering that. Cause, you know, I'm thinking like, of course, therapists for sure, but you know, if somebody's listening on my audience, you know, might be parents or people directly themselves, right? So I'm sure, like, I know if this was back in the day, I'd be like, oh, I want to see the scale. I want to see, where am I at, right? So I just would want to know, like, is that okay that I use it by myself? Does it have to be with a therapist, right? Those are, you know, of course, always the common questions, because we all want to know about ourselves.
Yes, yes. So yeah, it was developed for people with OCD that aren't necessarily in therapy. So it's really kind of like, we hope it would be helpful for people with OCD, not in therapy, loved ones of it, even professionals, as Jackie was saying before, therapist professionals, but even like other types. So we hope, you know, in school, there's a lot more, you know, on like mental health awareness and incorporating that into curriculum. So something like this for like teachers or for school counselors, even like neuropsychologists, we would hope that the measures, you know, not as short as like a one-page thing, but looking at increasing the assessment of OCD and neuropsych exams. We would love for this tool to hopefully be helpful for neuropsychologists too. We can see it applicable in many ways.
What were you going to say, Jackie?
Yeah, and I was just gonna bounce off on that and just talk about just medical professionals in general, right? Because like you know, what our research was on, so many people go to primary care to get mental health help, and the doctors, while they are well trained, they might not know about all the ways that OCD presents itself. And so, you know, having a scale like this where it kind of lists so many of the common themes and the ways in which compulsions can present and intrusive thoughts can present, can, I think, be really helpful in being like, oh, okay, like this fits, and so they can make the right referral to a specialist or the right type of treatment.
Absolutely. And how much time would you think it would take somebody to, if they were going to sit down and kind of go through this whole scale, and how many pages is it? I don't know if you have that offhand.
I mean, I don't know exactly how many pages, but I can pull it up really quick. But Jackie, do you want to speak about the time piece as I get the scale open?
Yeah, I think the timepiece, I think it should not take more than, I would say, maybe 10, 15 minutes max. I think it could be a lot shorter depending on how many I think symptoms the person has going on. So if a person has a lot of different, like, wide range of themes going on when in their OCD, of course, they're going to be checking off a lot more sections. And so that could take longer. But if a person is only struggling with, like, let's say, harm obsessions that show up in a number of different ways, then they would really be focusing on that one section. So it could be as short as a couple minutes.
Oh, that's wonderful. And of course, I do always want to put the caveat out there for folks listening. Those who have OCD, we all know we can also sometimes compulse around scales. So if it is taking some people longer, that happens if people get a little stuck. But in general, it sounds like it's a pretty straightforward and easy scale to take. And actually, if it's okay to share, I got a chance to peek at it, guys. So I think it's a wonderful scale. I love the examples. It's clear. It's to the point. Anybody who's been with me for a while knows I really love things like that. And so I strongly urge you to check it out. Obviously, we'll include all the links in the show notes. But yeah, Kim, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I need to to shout out my husband on that because he made it visually look nice. I gave him what we came up with the final version. I think it was like 19 pages or something. And I was like, Stefan, can you make this look nice, please? And make it look like user friendly. Can you make it front and back only? And he's like, I can't do front and back only. But we got it. So back to your question of how many pages. So the first page is just kind of information. So that's one page. And then there is the intrusive thought obsession page is a front and back. So that's 3 pages, front and back 1, and then 1 more page. And then the ritual page is 2 pages, front and back 1 page. So it's pretty kind of condensed, and he made it look visually, it flows very nicely, which
I love it.
Outside of our expertise area to do.
And like the ritual page is, let's see, I have it in front of me. So it's like 2 pages, but it's 2 pages because we really went into each ritual and like really explained it and gave examples of each ritual. So it's not like just like a checklist of like, oh, checking, organizing, rearranging, reassurance seeking. It really goes into like what that looks like and the different ways that can present. So, it gives an explanation for what each of the rituals are.
Yeah, which I think, again, is great, right? Because a lot of people, when you're thinking you might have OCD, if you don't know some of these nuances, you can skip it. Like I said, I'm certainly an example. Like I was a ruminator. I had no idea that was a thing, or tracing objects, or constantly saying no clue. That was all part of this, right? And so I think it's wonderful to have things that have more explanation. So like you were saying earlier, right, then when people are looking at it, they can, find themselves in there and recognize, okay, yeah, this is part of this way that this shows up.
And I think from a treatment perspective too, because a lot of times if people kind of view their OCD as like, this is what it is, and then they're working on that piece, which is great. But if there's other ways that their OCD is really showing up, then that's going to that can limit the therapy, the progress if they're not working on it, because all OCD, regardless of the content, all reinforces itself, right? So the underlying processes are the same. And so if someone has a certain type of OCD that they're not even like thinking of as OCD, and then they're not going to be working on it because they're not thinking of it. And so I think that our hope is that looking at the scale might be like, oh yeah, like I know I have like this, but wait, this is OCD. And so then that would could bring it for something that they can work on if they're in therapy or not. And that would kind of let people kind of get to that next place in their recovery of really holistically being able to focus on like all the ways that OCD is showing up, is kind of another hope that the scale will be of value for.
I love that. And Jackie, if I can come back to you, because earlier you did mention about your own OCD, if it's okay with you to kind of ask some questions, because I think it's helpful if anybody's comfortable to talk about it, like what was your process? For example, were you somebody like that didn't know and until you kind of stumbled upon something? And so something like this obviously has even more value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've had OCD since I was 11, so like 6th grade. Summer was kind of when it all started. I didn't realize it was OCD until I was in my early 20s. And even then, it was like through Google searches that I did by myself. I went through a lot of different mental health professionals on Guam, went to medical professionals. I went to a pastor, and nobody was really able to give me an accurate diagnosis. No, and even when I was, one professional did say, well, it sounds like you might be struggling with OCD, but it wasn't like a sure thing. And they really didn't know what to do with the kinds of intrusive thoughts that I was having. They didn't identify those intrusive thoughts as OCD. I was going through a lot of more taboo themes, like harm, stuff like that. So yeah, it was a really long journey. It took until I think I was about 26, 27 when I actually was able to connect with an OCD specialist outside of Guam and get treatment through exposure and response prevention and get better. So it was a really long journey for me, which kind of is the reason why I decided to specialize in the area that I do, and made me passionate about being able to provide education to people about the various manifestations of OCD, because I didn't know either. Like when I first read about OCD, when I did the Google researches, I even denied it to myself. I was like, well, but I don't wash my hands all the time. I'm not doing all this other stereotypical stuff that I thought was OCD. And so it took me a while to even accept my own diagnosis, because of, what I had in my mind as like, oh, this is what OCD is supposed to look like, because I didn't have the knowledge at the time.
Right, that's exactly right. I think a lot of people, and I certainly get this through emails and DMs and in general, so many people have that experience.
Yeah.
And also, to your point, being in a location like being in Guam, you just said that I think that you're the only specialist in the area, right? There are locations like that around the world still where there isn't a specialist. People don't know. So how much more important it is to have a resource like the OCD Academy, making sure that we have access or are able to give access to people around the world, right? So that folks can keep learning more about it and start to connect the dots. And because part of OCD too is even if you Google search, which like yourself, I did, but then you doubt it. You're like, yeah, but is it really? I don't know. I don't think so. And then you go back to, well, people do all these light switches are on off, or they check doors. I don't do that. So nah, I don't think so. And you can go for so much longer without having the help that you actually need, right? And things can really spiral out.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for both of you for coming on the show and talking about this and really diving into the OCD Awareness Scale and creating this. Sounds like there's at least 15 different themes that are covered, and there's wonderful examples that are in there, and amazing that you were able to condense it actually to just, it sounds like a few pages. I was expecting a lot more than that, and and hearing that it can be done within 10-15 minutes, I mean, anybody listening, it's a no-brainer, obviously. So for folks who are here listening, if they would like to find you, work on this, or get access to this, where can they go? How can they find you?
Yeah.
We have a website, www.theocdacademy.com. The OCD Awareness Scale is on there, so they can find the scale there. And we have an Instagram page. It's at _OCD_Academy.
Yes. And the OCD Awareness Scale, it's free. So anyone can just kind of download it whenever they visit the site and would like to.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for coming on the show and talking about this.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us. Yes. Yeah. So it's such a fun way how we connected, and we're so appreciative of you inviting us to be here.
Thanks.
Yeah.